chances before you. One by one we will take you.
Top five.
A top five.
It's a top five. It's what we do occasionally, except there's two of us. So it's really a top 10. And we say that every time because we're doing each of our particular genres. You know, I'm David. That's Tim over there. And we're here to give our top five in the genres of horror and science fiction. I approached Tim with the idea of desert island movies. So way back decades ago, you used to play this in school and everything else where you go, okay, if you were marooned on a desert island, what 5 books would you take? Or it used to be, the biggest one was always, what 5 albums would you have to have with you to survive, you know, forever alone on this deserted island?
Yes, Destroyer.
You know, yeah. Oh my God.
That's about how long ago it was when I played that game.
You would probably have to have that, and you would have to have something by Zeppelin, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah.
You would
Physical Graffiti.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
But so we set it up of each of our genres movies. So science fiction movies, horror movies. You could only rewatch these 5 forever and forever. This is, you're on a deserted island, you're all alone. You've got obviously a huge stereo and television system, and you can play back.
And you can watch movies on the beach.
You can watch movies on the beach. So
I want to say one thing before we start. For those of you out there that are tuning into us for the first time, welcome. David and I, if you don't know our modus operandi, we always come into our recordings blind. So we don't really know what each other's going to say, whether we're talking about the movie of the week in our regular episodes of Johnny Has the Keys, or whether we're talking about Coming to Get You, which are coming attractions, or whether what have you. We don't know what we're going to say. Another thing with this particular top 5 is that we always kind of let our criteria be known.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you shared that because, yes, you know, we kind of pride ourselves on the fact that we are not a scripted podcast or a scripted YouTube channel. Even with this, you know, how would you define a desert island movie? How I defined it was just what I said. So for me, these are the 5 repeatable watching, incredible examples of the genre that I would want to preserve for myself personally. It's not like I'm saying these are the best ever made. It's these I could rewatch and rewatch and rewatch. And when I get really bored with watching the monkeys jump around the trees, I can watch this science fiction movie and feel good, or one of these 5. So what was your criteria then? What did you use to?
My criteria is similar. They're not necessarily the best of the genre, but my criteria was very simple. And this is probably the easiest top 5 I've ever had to do because I just picked the movies I've watched the most.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think mine fall into that same category. Yes, they do. As a matter of fact, even with the exception of one of my honorable mentions, but the rest of them, yes, I've probably watched each of these films at least a dozen times, if not.
Even my honorable mentions.
Yes, if not many, many more than that.
It's your sister, Cheryl!
Well, my number 5, big surprise, is A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yes.
David and I lived in the same town when this movie came out. He knows how crazy I was about it. I went and saw it 5 times at a theater. So I saw it in a theater a lot before it even came out on videotape or DVD or streaming or what have you. Freddy Krueger has always been one of my favorite villains. I hate the way they kind of diluted his evil going down, you know, the chain of films. But this first film, you can't beat it. I love it. I think Wes Craven did a really good job with it.
Perfect. I agree with that. I think that's a great comfort horror movie. If there
well, I mean, I am watching horror movies on the beach. So
yes. My number 5 is a classic called Forbidden Planet. I think it is a brilliant movie. I think it has a great cast, great effects, great sound, excellent story, semi-Shakespearean, kind of based on The Tempest. It's got it just set the bar so high for celluloid science fiction. And as we've said, I think when we talked about it before, I don't think you would ever have had Star Trek without Forbidden Planet.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
That brings me to my number 4, which would be The Evil Dead.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Excellent.
The first one of the series and my favorite for many, many reasons. Those of you that don't know, back before we had a YouTube channel, you can go back and listen to the audio of our Evil Dead podcast, but it was filmed in our hometown around the corner from my house. David and our friend Wynn worked behind the scenes on the production. So we have a lot of connections to this movie, other than the fact that I also just love it because it's scary as fuck.
It is. It is. Just rewatching when we did it for the podcast and everything, it's visceral without being visceral. Does that make sense?
I think it's visceral in many ways.
Well, when you put the pencil in the ankle, always gets me every time. And we're gonna get you. That's just creepy. That's a great one. That's your number 4.
Jack of Spades, Queen of Hearts. Why have you?
My number 4 borders into your territory, but we have covered it on the show and a lot of its permutations, everything else. My number 4 would be Alien, the original Ridley Scott. It is a combo of sci-fi and horror, probably the best combination of sci-fi horror ever. I could watch it on silent just for the production design and the photography, cinematography of that movie. Great casting. Sigourney Weaver, brilliant in it. It is just it's just a feel-good movie to me about what could happen, because I knew nothing of that movie when it first came out, other than someone had leaked the picture of them going into the orifice of the ship, the derelict ship. And these spacesuits looked kind of weird and they were cool. And it was a great big kind of very sexual looking orifice opening on the side of this. I was going, what is this movie about? And was blown away from the minute I saw it. I must have seen this movie. I've probably seen this movie 50 times. I love Alien. I think it's very well done.
My number 3 is Halloween, John Carpenter's seminal classic from 1978, starring Jamie Lee Curtis. I cannot tell you. I would say out of all of these movies, that is probably the movie I've seen the most. I mean, there's not a lot more I can say about it. It's a classic. We've talked about John Carpenter. We did a John Carpenter Christmas here recently. He does not only the directing, but the music. It was one of those things where everything came together in the perfect way at the perfect time. And
it's scary.
Yeah, and it's scary.
My number 3 would be the one that revolutionized probably science fiction and cinema forever, which was at the time a simple title of just Star Wars. It ended up becoming A New Hope, episode 4, A New Hope, as a matter of fact. It just blew my mind. I think when we talked about it on the podcast, the original, I had gotten the album a few months earlier because they released the album before the movie came out, and I had blown the album up listening to it, John Williams music, everything else. But again, this is one that I probably wouldn't like to listen to silently, just because the music is so impactful in the story to me. Luke standing on the dune and the twin suns, and you hear Ben's theme and all of that, the action adventure of the final assault on the Death Star. It is old school space opera. It is not technically, quote, science fiction, but it's mostly space opera. But it's a fun ride. It's great. It's a classic. It will always be, to me, it will always be the ultimate. Several people say Empire is better. Empire is probably better plotted, but there's nothing like, my teenage boy sitting in that theater watching Star Wars. I watched Star Wars, I think, over 70 times in the theater.
Wow. That's a lot.
Over the 2.5 years that it stayed in theaters, I watched it almost every weekend. I watched it forever. Yeah.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
I've seen a couple of movies 5 times in the theater, but that's like the most I've ever seen anything in the theaters. 5 times.
Yeah, no, Star Wars is my record. Jaws is my second record. Jaws is over 50 in the theater.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I have noticed another thing, and that is that we're also picking films by classic directors of the genre.
Of course.
Mentioned George Lucas and Ridley Scott. I've mentioned Wes Craven, Sam Raimi, John Carpenter, and now I'm going to mention Stanley Kubrick and say,
Why are you torturing me like this?
The Shining is my number 2.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That is high praise indeed. Yes.
It is one of those movies. And you remember this when we were growing up and video was popular. I mean, we watched this all the time on videotape.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, It seemed like, you talk about watching something once a weekend. I mean, it seemed like we watched it every other week, at least.
Yeah.
For a long time.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant movie. Brilliant movie.
And it's a slow burn, which we already know is the kind of movies I dig. Incredible performances from Shelley Duvall and Jack Nicholson and Danny, the guy that plays Danny Lloyd, that played Danny Torrance. It's the first ghost story movie I remember where the ghosts were kind of physical looking and tangible and not like transparent wraiths floating in the air. The menace, just everything about this movie. Well, I mean, it's Stanley Kubrick, so everything was meticulously picked over until it was perfect.
My number 2, not necessarily a classic director of the genre, but as you know, one of my definitive science fiction movies of all time, The Day the Earth Stood Still. It is... I watch it mostly for the message all the way through it, from the paranoia, panic, red scare kind of feel at the beginning to I come in peace, literally meaning I come in peace, and being shot within like the first 3 minutes you land on the planet kind of says a lot about where we are as a species. And the whole storyline and plot line of the beginning of by the end of you've got to change your ways. Once you guys calm down and can stop fighting amongst yourselves, maybe you can go into space. But until then, we're going to be out here watching you and, do it right kind of thing. And it just still affects me when I watch it. Michael Rennie is excellent in it. Patricia Neal and Robert Weiss. I mean,
I was going to say Robert Weiss is the biggie behind that one, I think.
Yeah.
And like I said, another powerhouse director that you have chosen.
Not necessarily a director of that genre.
No.
He's only done really a couple of science fiction stories, but both of them were pretty impactful. But he's known for every other thing he touches. Every movie he touches is great. So,
same with Kubrick. I mean, Kubrick was not known for horror either. 2 directors out there that could pretty much do any genre. Well, that's going to bring me to my number 1. And this is, I'm sure, going to be an earth-shattering surprise to you. But it is Dawn of the Dead.
Yep.
Can't live without this movie. I have to watch this movie at least once a year, and there for a while, probably once a month. And it was really hard to pick this one because I could almost say the same thing about Night of the Living Dead. I love Night of the Living Dead because of it's the origin story that George Romero told about the zombies and the isolation in the farmhouse. The only thing that elevates Dawn of the Dead are the performances. To me, are much better than some of the performances in Night of the Living Dead.
I think I would agree with that, but I also think the action pieces are what keep Dawn going.
Mm-hmm.
The plotting of we're going to figure out a way to close off this wall and hide, and then let's go clean up, and you're hearing the dum, dum, and the one guy's in the wheelchair or the wheelbarrow.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's just a great movie. Tom
Savini
did excellent effects and actually acted in the movie. He was one of the main antagonists. It ends on a downer note, but with a slight ray of hope. I don't know. Everything about this movie, I used to hear those commercials when it was a midnight movie at the Kingston 4. The most horrible movie in the world has been banned in 50 countries or what have you. I had to see this movie. And then I finally saw it. And I probably went. Now, this is another one I probably went and saw at least 5 times in the theater. But it was at a midnight movie because it didn't play in the daytime.
Oh, no. And I still remember, I told you that story. I still remember watching it at the campus theater at UT, and there was that entire row of people in front of us. And as soon as that first zombie bit that woman on her neck, and it went all over his face. And this guy stood up and said, "Hell no," and went running out the theater. And he never came back.
Right.
He never.
Right. It's just you had never seen anything like that before. And even though the blood was too red, and nowadays you can tell how they did the effects, at the time it was still disturbing as hell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very much
taboo. So
Yeah.
that's my number one. What's your number
That
one?
is a great number one. My number one, of course, I cannot do a comfort science fiction list without Star Trek. So it would be Wrath of Khan.
Oh, wow.
I could watch Wrath of Khan over and over and over and over and over
Yeah.
again, mostly for the Shakespearean elements and the emotional elements in that story. Everything was kicking on all cylinders. The effects, the acting, the toupees, the costume design, the story itself, everything was clicking, and Star Trek was back, in my opinion. We have the side podcast where we do the original series, and we both love the original series, but Wrath of Khan just elevated all the good Roddenberry and Gene Coon elements into a great story, a great science fiction story.
Yeah, I totally agree. Nicholas Meyer, I think, directed that.
Yep.
And
wrote it.
Yeah, that would be another one that I probably saw about 5 times in the theater.
Yeah. And I've probably seen over a dozen in theaters. Yeah, easily for Wrath of Khan. So that's our top 5. Do you have any honorable mentions? You said you had a couple?
I do. I mentioned already briefly Night of the Living Dead, but it's not in my honorable mentions. However, 2 are, and I basically just ruled them out because they're sci-fi. They could easily be in the top 5 as well.
Okay.
They are Alien and The Thing.
Ah, well, there you go.
Obviously, you included Alien, and The Thing should be in there too. They're both sci-fi horror, and since I was eliminating sci-fi from it strictly, that's the only reason they're on my honorable mention. Number 2 would be Silence of the Lambs. I've seen that one a dozen times at least, but if I'm stranded on an island, I don't want to look at real life horror. I want fantasy horror, so that one can go.
That's a great point. Yeah, because that could be the guy next door, kind of
right.
thing. Yeah.
And why would you want to get back to humanity if it has people like James Gum in it? So
True.
So that was my reasoning for there. And then 3rd was Jaws, because I'm on a desert island.
I'm on a desert island. Don't want to be reminded what's in the water.
Nope. Those are my honorable mentions.
My honorable mentions. One is it's fairly newer. It's been within the past, 5-10 years, and it's really good. Is Ex Machina. I really liked Ex Machina, and it affected me a lot. The photography, the performances, the story, the pace, all of it really good. It almost made the list as my number 5. The 2 other ones, number 2 would be Blade Runner, another one that really altered the science fiction visuals and storytelling, another one by Ridley Scott. Right. So I didn't want to put that and Alien in the same 5, because that just, 2 movies by the same director. What?
I would choose Alien over Blade Runner too.
Yeah,
for
I would too.
Reasons.
And again, we've talked through it when we did the podcast, so that sort of thing. And then, of course, the one that I always say when people say, what is the definitive science fiction movie, meaning a movie where science propels the entire story from beginning to end, has a detail, is Andromeda Strain. And that's the one I always give as an example. I love watching that movie. I remember seeing it on television even. And when he scalped that guy's wrist and the crystalline blood came out, I went, what am I watching? This is crazy. Another Robert Wise.
Robert Wise.
Yeah.
So, lots of themes going on today. That's going to do it for our top 5. We're glad that you joined us. We'd love it if you join us for some of our other shows here on YouTube or out there on the airwaves in podcast land. Like I said, Coming Attraction Show, Coming to Get You. Sometimes I talk about Shudder horror movies. If you want to visit what David mentioned, our Star Trek podcast, that is available on patreon.com/Johnny Has the Keys. And I guess until we do another one of these, I will be seeing you, David. Oh, be sure and subscribe down below if you guys haven't subscribed too.
Please do.
Can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.